we must endeavor to close every gap in our implementation efforts to ensure the attainment of set targets.
President Buhari signs Executive Order 12 to improve implementation of presidential priorities.
It is legally and constitutionally inappropriate for the Conference of Speakers to use the 4 bills as a quid pro quo to act on the 44 bills the National Assembly has transmitted.
Deputy Senate President says only 11 states passed constitutional amendment bills.
INEC chairman expresses dissatisfaction with political parties and campaign process.
On Good Morning Nigeria today, we focus on the predictions of the recent inflationary rates.
Inflationary trend is one challenge that Nigerian economy is facing, and the latest National Bureau of Statistics data released on Tuesday confirms that Nigeria's inflation rate increased to 20.77% in September 2022, up from 20.52% recorded in the previous month.
Well, the latest figure indicates a 4.4 percent points higher compared to the rate recorded in September 2021, which was 16.63%. And according to a web portal that publishes Nigeria's historical macroeconomic data, now this represents the highest rate of inflation. That is to say, the latest figure of 20.77 represents the highest rate of inflation since September 2005.
All right, and the report from the National Bureau of Statistics says the increase in the country's inflation is not unconnected to the disruption in the supply of food products, increase in import costs as a result of a depreciating currency, and the general increase in cost of production.
Well, the Consumer Price Index breakdown suggests that gas, liquid fuel, air and road transport, as well as solid fuel, were the highest increases recorded, while food inflation rate in September of 2022 marked an uptick with an increase in the prices of bread, cereals, potatoes, yams, and oils.
On state-by-state basis, the highest inflation rate was recorded in Kogi, Rivers, and Benue, while Abuja, Borno, and Adamawa had the slowest rise of inflation.
During the last Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the Central Bank of Nigeria in September, the CBN had raised the benchmark interest rates by 150 basis points. And this, of course, now meant that it became 15.5%, marking also the highest level in 20 years.
The decision, as reported, is in a bid to curb the rising cost of goods and services in the country, with the Apex Bank also increasing the cash reserve to mop up excess liquidity in the economy.
With the exchange rate, as it were, on a downward trend this year, falling to as low as 740 naira to the dollar at the parallel market and 436 naira to the dollar at the official window. What are the implications of the latest inflationary rate as announced by the NBS? And of course, we already know that there are supply chain disruptions plus a global energy crisis. And what should be done to check the rising trend of inflation in the country? In other words, what measures are available to the government, both through the monetary and fiscal authorities, to deal with inflation? These are issues we intend to interrogate in our conversation segment on Good Morning Nigeria today. My name is Kingsley Osadolo, and I welcome you to the program live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority.
And I am Kirian Umai, also welcoming you to the show today. We'll bring you the complementary segments that will form part of our package today. Now, Anne Jibono is here with the news highlights. Hello, Anne.
Hello, Kieran and Kingsley. Good morning. Here is the news. A culture of accountability and transparency in the pursuit of good governance and effective service delivery to Nigerians has been formally institutionalized. This followed the signing of an Executive Order 12 by President Muhammadu Buhari, aimed at improving performance, management, coordination, and implementation of presidential priorities of the federal government. This was at the closing ceremony of the third Ministerial Performance Review Retreat, during which the president warned government officials against abandoning governance for electioneering.
Business that we must speedily complete to ensure we finish well. We must, therefore, endeavor to close every gap in our implementation efforts to ensure the attainment of set targets by 2023.
The National Assembly says it is disheartening that out of the 36 state assemblies, only 11 have considered and voted on the 44 constitutional alteration bills transmitted to them. The National Assembly Joint Committee on the Review of the 1999 Constitution stated this at the committee's joint briefing.
For the Conference of Speakers to use the 4 bills as a quid pro quo to act on the 44 bills the National Assembly has transmitted.
And the engagement of presidential candidates by northern pressure groups ended with meetings of 2 presidential candidates to discuss issues of national interest. The session hosted presidential candidates of the All Progressives Congress, Ahmed Bola Tinubu, and that of the Labour Party, Peter Obi.
What I am bringing to the table, a good experience, can-do attitude, thinking and doing it. Our economic plan, we utilize the vast natural resources we have through strategic investment.
While the National Integrity Movement, on the platform of the All Progressives Congress, is meeting party chieftains ahead of their success in the forthcoming general elections.
Our candidate that emerge irrespective of wherever they come from, we believe they emerge based on their pedigree, based on their integrity. Your Excellency, we feel this is an opportunity that we cannot afford to allow Nigerians to lose this kind of opportunity.
The advantage we have is that we already have an established structure to answer that. And I think that we should begin to go into politics of development.
A few days after the commencement of campaigns ahead of the 2023 elections, INEC Chairman Professor Mahmood Yakubu is not comfortable with the manner parties are taking off with the process. He stated this at a training workshop on the technologies to be deployed for the elections in Abuja.
Reports of clashes among parties and their supporters in some states of the country during the ongoing electioneering campaign is worrisome. So too is the reported denial of access to public facilities for parties and candidates in some states of the Federation.
The Global Vice Chairman, Advocacy for Good Governance and Social Justice Network, Dr. Hussaini Kumasi, has been appointed Head of Mission Nigeria of the International Peace Commission, United Nations organ. Stepping into the new role, Dr. Kumasi cast no doubt on his preparedness to tackle the task ahead as a civil rights advocate.
We will try. We will talk to them. Those that are holding arms should lay down their arms and embrace peace. Money spent on security, I think, is something that will be better to be spent on infrastructure development.
Well, that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kieran and Kingsley after the break. Stay with us.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. It's time for a business news segment, and here is our correspondent, Alika Opanachi Arwa.
The federal government and local manufacturers are exploring sustainable incentives to encourage non-oil exporters to improve productivity and exports, which will in turn raise earnings from non-oil exports. The Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment has reassured manufacturers and exporters of the federal government's resolve to make foreign exchange available for businesses in the country. The Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, Niyi Adebayo, gave this indication at the 5th annual meeting of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria Export Promotion Group in Lagos with the theme Non-Oil Export Incentives in Nigeria, Effectiveness and Sustainability. Meanwhile, oil prices gave up some gains on Tuesday, following reports that the Biden administration may release oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to stem rising prices. Brent crude futures rose 0.28% to stand at $91.88 per barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate inched up 0.37% to $85.78 per barrel. Oil futures briefly turned negative after each rising more than 0.5%. With Business News, Alika Opanachi Arwa.
Thank you, Alika, for the business package. Next on the program is a review of today's national dailies. Newspaper review.
All right, Kieran, we have three newspapers actually. Kieran, you got two, I have one. So let's begin with one of the two you got. Yes.
Okay. Now, leadership newspaper. Let's go to the above the nameplate. We have a scale of oil theft has significantly reduced. That's according to KRA. It's on page 25. PMB to inaugurate APC Presidential Campaign Council on Friday. Details on page 6. Now, below the name flag, concerns as America's bank predicts a 20% naira devaluation in 2023. More details on page 7. And now the lead story, Northern leaders deny endorsing any presidential candidate. That's also on page 7. But the lead story on the leadership this morning, again, Constitution Amendment exercise hits brick wall. That's on page 4. But there are riders to that. State assemblies return to National Assembly with 4 fresh bills, 7 months after receiving 44 bills. One state police, judicial council, legislative bureaucracy, bills passed. NLC threatens to shut down state assemblies over local government autonomy. Wike shuns Lagos PDP candidate endorses Sanwo-Olu for re-election. That's on page 13. No single government can deliver all democracy dividends. That's the SGF. The story is on page 8. INEC worried over clashes at campaigns. State's denial of access. That's on page 6. All right, that's leadership.
All right, so we also took a look at the front page of the Daily Sun newspaper. Daily Sun newspaper, looking at the earpiece, that's the headline beside the name flag. I build on Buhari's legacy. That's attributed to Tinubu. I'll build on Buhari's legacy, according to Tinubu, says president has delivered on APC promises. And then below the nameplate says 2023, Nigeria must remain on path of democratic consolidation. That's according to the United Kingdom. State assemblies put review of constitution in jeopardy. Only 11 vote on 44 proposed changes. NLC mobilizes against governors and speakers. INEC plans security meeting and worries over violence at campaigns and hate speech, insists on deployment of technology. 2023 election again, it says 2023 election referendum on APC performance. That's attributed to the PDP candidate, Atiku. Leaves for Europe. Gunmen on rampage in Niger, Plateau, Bauchi, Benue, and Anambra kill 8, kidnap Catholic priest and 25 others. Reps and Southeast bishops and royal fathers ask federal government to free Kanu, that's Nnamdi Kanu. Obi is the candidate of the Labour Party in next year's presidential election. Obi faults Governor El-Rufai's arrest claim. Obi faults Governor El-Rufai's arrest claim. That's on page 27. You have the details, as we just said, on page 27. Kirian, let's take a couple of
let's
headlines.
take a daily trust briefly before we go to further analysis. Now, 7 months to go, Buhari orders ministers to prepare transition documents. It's on page 32. Boko Haram killed 100,000, displaced over 2 million people. Defense chief, page 34. NLNG falls. Nigerians may pay more for cooking gas. It's on page 23. Now, the lead story here, despite 1 billion naira allocation, Constitution amendment in limbo. 4 riders to that. 25 states withhold votes over state police. Others. Your threat won't intimidate us, Deputy Senate President. Governors frustrating review, NGF. Why we wrote to National Assembly, that's the speakers now. Okay, now INEC summons parties over Electoral Act violation, attacks on opponents. It's on page 33. Bandits attack Niger hospital, kill 2, abduct doctor and others. On page 6. And Kano, NNPP, PRP governorship candidates commit to media trust election debate. That's on page 32. Now, this may sound like an ad, but I think it's a good information. Boa to Kogi, that's of course the key investor in this country. He says, we are no longer interested in 50,000 hectare land. Investors may shun state over hostility. That's according to experts.
It's not an advertisement, Kira.
Oh,
I understand what he said. I mean, it's similar to an ad. It's a very serious development.
Exactly.
Not on account of what has been playing out between the Kogi state government and Dangote Industries over the Obajana cement factory. Now, the State House of Assembly also wrote to BOA to say, look, you have not paid compensation to the landowners from whom 50,000 hectares of land was taken. And that was, of course, in 2012 for the purpose of investment by BOA. So BOA has now written back to say, I gave 3 reasons for not continuing with the proposed investment. One, and these are very critical. One, it says that only 30% of the land size is apparently useful for its purpose. So 50,000 hectares, pretty huge, but it says that only 30% and that the remainder, mostly 66%, is made of rocks, made of hills, and of course inaccessible. Second reason, BOA says it doesn't want to continue with the investment is that the state government has not provided the access infrastructure for it to be able to get to the land, and that is not part of the agreement that the investor will be the one to provide the access infrastructure. Thirdly, that area where you have the land located has been the epicenter of acts of insecurity in recent years, and they don't want to go and risk their lives. So they said, look, please revoke the allocation. We're no longer interested. But that's a big loss, you know.
It's obviously stated. But one aspect of it is the fact that when he originally negotiated for the land, some of these reasons have been there because some of them are natural, issues in terms of accessibility to the place, and again the rocky nature of the area.
Yeah,
and of course
the
insecurity risk involved in that. But that being said, part of what played out between Kogi state government and Dangote, of course, is an eye opener for some investors, who may engage some states in terms of a huge kind of infrastructure that Dangote has in that establishment. So it's not an easy deal. So,
well, part of Kyria, I'm sure the state is looking to raise revenue to say, look, you are supposed to have paid for this land, unless, of course, the contribution of the land by the state was meant to be an equity investment in the particular project. But they're saying, I was curious about that aspect where the BOA said that only about 30% of the land size is valuable. If there was a survey, you should also the survey should have indicated that not just survey on paper, but also at least some oversight. You fly over the place,
some level of feasibility study,
precisely to know what is useful for it. And who knows, Kyria? Let me not speculate. Who knows? The some rocky locations, you might encounter some very valuable minerals.
Of course,
yes,
of course.
Yeah.
If you explore that. Now, that this issue of constitutional amendment being in limbo, as reported by most of the papers reported that the state Houses of Assembly not playing their own role, the constitutional role. Just about only 11 that responded, positively to the request from the National Assembly. So, what does that really show in terms of democracy and national development? If we can't effectively amend constitution, our constitution as a nation, because knowing full well that most of the acts or constitutional provisions that we have in the country are faulty. That has been established. Now, the process of getting them amended is, of course, becoming a huge challenge.
I don't think that this is a huge challenge. On the one hand, it looks like a storm in a teacup. On the other hand, it also provides an opportunity for actualizing one of the processes and procedures you normally would engage in a democratic setting, namely lobbying and persuasion. The National Assembly already transmitted 44 bills to the various state houses of assembly. And I recall when we had a conversation on this topic, on the next steps now to amend the constitution, I raised the question, what is the deadline for the state houses of assembly to make their returns? There was no clear answer, because that has to do with process and procedure. Now, I imagine, for instance, on the face of it, that the deadline will be until the tenure of the current National Assembly elapses. If you want to be generous, we say, okay, up until May 29th next year. We are still about 7 months away from that deadline. We don't have to wait for that particular period, because when they make their returns and then you harmonize and you know which, if 24 state houses of assembly vote yes for an amendment, then it passes. The National Assembly then makes a transmission to the president, and the president, of course, once he gives his assent, that becomes an amendment.
But I think some people are saying, Kisley, that sorry, please for continuation. No, the process is quite slow. The Houses of Assembly members are not discharging their responsibility as it should be. The issue of timeline that you mentioned is quite in order. It's quite germane, because if you want to engage in a process, you should give yourself a timer. So look, between now and then, I'll be able to achieve this. This process should be able to be terminated at this point for us to achieve the objective for which the bills were actually sent to them. That's the point. And if we're not getting results from that, of course, it is in limbo, and it's a huge setback in terms of making progress in our democracy, the practice of democracy, and what have you. If we do not practicalize these things and get things happening, everything is in limbo. Some of these, remember some of the bills that we had for 9 years, 10 years, and the National Assembly. What are we doing? You cannot deliberate on an issue and conclude it, decisively, and say, look, this thing has been concluded.
Well, Kyria, your point is noted. Thank you. But we must recognize that the constitutional jurisprudence that we are operating, the steps required for the amendment of the Constitution prescribe that the National Assembly and the state houses of assembly have concurrent powers. The National Assembly will pass the bill for the amendment and then transmit to the state legislatures. You will require 24 of those state houses of assembly to get their concurrence before it then comes back to the National Assembly, which then transmits to the state. But Kyria, but this is the point. Nobody, the same way that the National Assembly cannot be stampeded to work on a bill, the same way the State House of Assembly cannot be dictated to by the National Assembly. But
7 months
no, hang on,
after receiving the bill.
no,
that's the point the Assembly is making.
Hang on, Kirian. It is now left for various interest groups, such as you are saying, to say, look, what is happening in the State House of Assembly? What are you doing with these bills? There is a second leg to it, namely that the State House of Assembly have written back, those of them that haven't considered the bills and passed them, to say, look, we have a new set of proposals to include. If you recall, only a couple of months ago, the governors of the northern states said, no, the time has come now for us to have state police. So the state legislatures are saying, all right, as part of this whole amendment process, let us have a bill passed on establishment of state police as part of this trove.
Should they initiate any other new idea into this? They are to deliberate on this given to them. It's good to bring up some other issues, but not on this platform. That is the delay I was talking about.
But they are saying
they still deal with state police issue. It can always be done, but not to now jeopardize a process that would have resulted into an achievement. Not just because they will dragging this for next 10 years.
Well, fine. That's why I said the powers are concurrent. They are saying that is sometimes some persons will say this is blackmail. They say, look, we are having this set of amendments, and it will be the 5th alteration to the Constitution. While we are dealing with all of this, we have received the 44 bills that you sent to us. But here we are, we have fresh ideas. So what is left is to say, propose the bills yourself, assuming you want to do that. Let us see what the provisions are. Let the National Assembly deliberate on those things. It will also include State Judicial Council, because you have National Judicial Council. You also have a proposal for streamlining the procedure for removing presiding officers of State House of Assembly, as well as the legislative bureaucracy. You can say, what is it that you can negotiate with these guys to get it done? But it is not sufficient, in my opinion, to say that you will expect the State House of Assembly to be a mere rubber stamp and say, let you have passed to them, let them approve, and then we have
your point is very clear, but we're only saying that delay is unnecessary. All the processes we are mentioning that are practicable, are things you can deal with. All this bureaucracy is created by human beings and stuff like that. Someone will keep a file in his office for 2-3 days without dealing with the file and stuff like that. So the idea is that don't introduce new idea, deal with the one present, then you can bring the other one later. Don't use this platform because you already jeopardizing the platform. That's what we're saying. That's what the National Assembly is saying.
I agree. But filibustering is a recognized aspect of legislative work.
Now, they have concurrent powers, I believe. Yes. But if there's any crisis in any state assembly, the National Assembly takes over. If that is the case. So
no. There's no crisis. There's no crisis.
To show that we are equal, but the power pass power.
Kira, I recall in the early part of, now you mentioned this, I'm not quite sure how it ended. There were some state houses of assembly that had crisis. They were unable to sit. Some of them were even sitting under a tree. I think Enugu State was one of them. Yes, Enugu. Sometimes Edo State, they were not sitting in the chamber. They were sitting at purporting to be sitting at government house. And at some point, the National Assembly decided to invoke its constitutional powers by taking over the legislative function. But we haven't had that lately. So I think that was on account of the inability of the legislature at the state level to transact the business of the legislature.
Exactly.
But that is not relevant in this particular case now. So, yes.
All right. This is where we conclude the segment, newspaper review. We'll see you again on this segment tomorrow when we return on Good Morning Nigeria's newspaper review. For now, we are taking a short break. When we come back, we shall be focusing on the issue concerning the rising inflation in the land.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, and we're live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, to begin our conversation on the latest inflationary rate figures provided by the National Bureau of Statistics, we'll take this background up, put together by our correspondent Joseph Osen.
For quite a while, it has been a case of adjusting and adapting to difficult circumstances to sustain life for many Nigerians. This is largely due to high cost of living, as the country continues to witness increased inflation rates. For the past 3 months, the nation has reported hike in inflation. In July, the National Bureau of Statistics report indicated inflation rate increased to 19.64% on a year-on-year basis in July, 2.27 percentage point higher compared to the rate recorded in July 2021, which was 17.38%. The current release by the Bureau shows a surge to 20.77% in September 2022 from 20.52% recorded last month. Disruption in the supply of food products, increased cost of import as currency depreciates, and increase in cost of production to the Bureau are major contributing factors. The Consumer Price Index suggests petroleum products, air and road transportation recorded the highest increase. For food, bread, cereals, tubers, and oil top the chart. Economic experts believe the country's struggle to lower its inflation rate is highly connected to insecurity in the country, the Russian-Ukraine crisis, cutting short supply of major import staple foods such as rice and wheat. Meanwhile, hiking price of petroleum products and current exchange rate of 740 naira to a dollar at the black market and 436 naira per dollar official rate have not helped matters, culminating to a dwindling economy. For many Nigerians, the desire of a better economy is paramount, and hope for short-term measures to cushion hardship brought by persistent increase in cost of goods. Analysts question if CBN policies to control rising cost of goods are working. So, given the circumstances the country has found itself, what strategies can it adopt for improved economy? Guests on Good Morning Nigeria will address the implication of Nigeria's latest inflation figures and profile solutions.
All right, thank you, Joseph, for that background. And joining us in the studio this morning for the conversation, we have Dr. Emeka Okengo, development economist. You're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Pleasure to be here. Good morning, Nigerians.
All right. We also have Yushao Aliu. He is an economist and, of course, an analyst.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome to the program.
Thank you, and good morning, Nigeria.
All right. And also joining this conversation via Zoom, another regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria, that's Dr. Muda Yusuf. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. It's also a former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Dr. Muda Yusuf, we're glad to have you this morning.
Morning.
All right. Let's begin with you. I mean, your Zoom connection is always very good, but today let's also start with you, in any eventuality. The numbers are out by the National Bureau of Statistics. Inflationary rate in September 2022 is put at 20.77, and it's the highest in many years. There are, of course, other numbers around this headline inflation figure that we have just seen. How does this lead us into understanding what is happening in the economy, and ultimately, near the end of the conversation, what we could do in terms of measures to ease the current rate of inflation? Dr. Yusuf.
Yeah, thank you very much. The situation with inflation is actually much worse than what the data is telling us. But the data is talking about 20.77. That is year on year, the headline inflation. That means that over the last 1 year, prices have increased by just 20%. That is whatever you bought last year, maybe for 1,000, you are now paying 1,200. But effective inflation rate, the reality that the citizens are facing, and the reality that businesses are facing is much worse than that. In many cases, inflation or prices had gone up by between 30 to 100%. In some cases, 150 to 200%. So the reality is much worse than the data that we have in terms of the impact of the high price or the increases in price generally, particularly within the basket of the goods that the average Nigerian consumes. So if there is any serious challenge, any major worry that the citizens have today and that the businesses have today in terms of their welfare, in terms of business performance, I think it is about inflation. And of course, there are quite a number of factors. Some of them are domestic, some of them are global, but it's a very challenging situation. Some of the factors that we know, of course, there are things that was too read out in your background report. The depreciation of the currency is a major factor because it has a pass-through effect across all sectors, even including food. Because if you look at all the sectors of the economy, at least to different degrees, there are import contents, and these things have been fueling the inflation that we have. Then, of course, you have the energy costs. We know what the cost of diesel has been. Right now, we are talking about between 800 to 1,000, depending on where you are within the country. And you know the impact of diesel, cost of energy on production and also on transportation. So these things also have very serious impact on prices across all sectors, whether you are talking of manufactured goods or you are talking of agricultural products. So the cost of transportation is a major issue. Then, of course, insecurity. Insecurity, the impact, especially on food inflation, is very, very profound because many of those who supply us with this food are not able to go to farms. The farming activities have been disrupted in many parts of the country. Some of them are currently in IDP camps. So that has affected the supply of food. And that, of course, is also creating challenges in terms of inflation. Then, of course, you have the issue of climate change. You are all witnesses to the problem of flooding that we are experiencing recently, although the impact of that will manifest maybe in 2-3 months' time, because it has a very devastating effect on agriculture. Then, of course, you have the component of desertification. Many of the lands that used to be arable have been affected by desertification. They are not as arable as they used to be, and that has been not only creating problems in terms of food production or agricultural production, it has also been creating problems in terms of the farmers' headers classes. So desertification is a very big issue, which we have not been sufficiently addressing. Then there is the monetary component of the factors fueling inflation, and that is the CBN, financing of deficits. That also has a very serious impact on money supply, on liquidity, and therefore on inflation. Because by current estimates, we are looking at close to 20 trillion in terms of CBN component of financing of the deficit, which is very, very high by any standard. That is also fueling inflation because it's regarded in economics as high-powered money. And these are very profound implications for inflation. Of course, you have the global factors. Before now, we had the disruptions in the supply chain, which came on the back of COVID. Now we are talking about Russia-Ukraine crisis, which is disrupting imports of some staple foods, affecting energy prices across the world. So these are some of the global factors. So in terms of the factors driving inflation, broadly speaking, these are the factors. As to what we'll do about it, I think we'll come to that as we progress with the conversation.
All right. Thank you, indeed, for your opening remarks. That's a clear elucidation of what the issues really are, the factors. and all that. And now back to the studio here, Dr. Emeko Kingu. I have an understanding that there is a global perspective to what is happening to the nation's economy that resulted to the inflation we're talking about. France is currently demonstrating, because of inflation and high cost of living in France and elsewhere across the globe. As a matter of fact, the current British Prime Minister, nearly lost her job, because of issues relating to inflation and high cost of living in the UK and what have you. So, where do you place Nigeria with this figure? The numbers that we have now. Is it generally really bad for Nigeria, considering what is global with respect to inflation and the high cost of living?
I wish it could be really bad. If it was really bad, then we'll start looking at how we can be able to manage really bad. Okay, but I think it's disastrous for me. It's disastrous for two reasons. Remember that we're just looking at the formal numbers. We haven't looked at the informal numbers. And then when you look at these formal numbers and informal numbers, you begin to now find where I think the major problem is, what you call the lack of a PPA. What is a PPA? Plan Program of Actions. Okay, because there's nothing that is happening today that has just happened. Nothing that is happening today qualifies for force majeure. Okay, we knew that the floods were going to come. They were not flash floods. Okay, we knew where they were going to pass through. They had kept passing that route. They have not all they're just doing now is because of the volume of water being released. Okay, that they are spreading. And as we speak today, you have a whole state of Nigeria, inclusive of the government house of that state, Bayelsa State, underwater. And this is not going to be receding anytime soon. From the figures of NIMET, we're going to be having another 2 weeks, okay, of these releases of water, which is a resource that I should have been able to use. So first, that is one. There's no need to go back and start reading what Muda had read out. I mean, he has read out all the factors, global factors. Now, the difference with what's happening in France and the other parts of the world and what's happening in Nigeria, okay, is what you used, okay, the high cost of living. Now, in our own case, okay, we don't even have a high cost. Okay, we are on a free flow, we're on a slide. Because if my figures and facts are right, as of yesterday in Nigeria, a bag of rice had risen to 42,000. That is not high cost, that is astronomical. Okay, and you don't have any social security in place to be able to hedge it for those who are living below the breadline. From the last statistics of ENDP, you have 97.6 or 97.8 Nigerians who are living under poverty. Remember that there is poverty and there is under poverty. There's what you call the poverty and there's what you call below the breadlines. So technically, you are not just opposing this against another report, that says about 2 million Nigerians are now facing acute, malnourishment. And then about 400,000 children are already malnourished. These are the stark realities. We might be able to query, the sources of this data, the efficacy and, authenticity of this data. But the truth of the matter is that even if it's a scoping study, it is scary, Kiran. So it's important we don't start looking at Nigeria and looking at France. Okay, yes, the global disruptions, okay? And I keep, each time we talk about this Russian-Ukrainian war, and they show Ukrainians, they are at war and they are eating. Okay, all right? They are at war and they are still producing and they are feeding their people. Russia is at war. Look at everything. They're attending all the ballrooms. They're attending all the ceremonies. They're doing all they need to do. They're at war. And then we that are not at war, we have more land than they do. We don't have any of this climate, yes, than they do. We are now saying that we are starving because two people who are eating well, wearing ballroom dresses, are at war. Okay, so I think, like I said earlier, we should pin this thing to where it should be. And what is it? Planning, forecasting, and being able to now be, proactive and not reactive to whatever issues. Today, last month, we were here discussing inflation, and what did he announce? The highest in 20 years. Today, we have announced the highest in 25 years. Maybe by next month, we'll announce the highest in 30 years. And then we'll now announce the highest in the history of Nigeria. That's not going to take us anywhere. That will be my opening. Thank you.
Dr. Emeka Okengu, thank you very much. Yusuf Aliu, let's have your take on this. What's playing out in the economy? I mean, there are a number of examples that we can cite. Muda talked about cost of transportation. At this time last year, the cost of a return ticket, let's say for a 1 hour flight, is what you would need today, minimum, for a one-way ticket. I'm sure you must have seen that. I mean, if you're flying from Abuja to Lagos, you're not going to get any ticket for less than 75,000. And at the beginning of this year period, if you recall, when airlines said they were raising airfares to 50,000, there was a great deal of alarm. But today, if you 80,000, you're lucky. In some cases, it will hit 120,000. So, what is it that we are dealing with?
I'm very happy that we got this figure today. Just to confirm what I said earlier this year in this studio, when the CBN rates were somehow hiked, and I categorically insist that the hiking is not a solution to the ailing economy, an economy that has so much of unemployment that is up to 33% of the population, and at the same time also looking at the inflation. As at that February, it was 15%, and today, if you now take the inflation 20.77%, you will now realize that the approach to tackling inflation from the CBN is weak, and if it is weak, there is need to look at unconventional ways to check this inflation, because when domestic issues are mentioned, you have to check our attitude to the banking sector, our attitude to money supply, because when money supply is emphasized, looking at the fact that the MPR is raised in an attempt to reduce the money supply in the economy, but other factors are not taken care. For instance, now the purchasing power of individuals in that economy, and also the velocity at which the liquidity is circulating. Today, on average, we are not using some denominations of our currencies. If you are faced with a challenge in the market to purchase an item, probably sweet, that is 3 for 10 naira, what is 1 naira? You cannot have the change. And because of that, the attitude of the business people, they qualify the price. So these are some of the things that is affected. And once a cashless policy is in place, and people are not observing to cashless policy, people are dealing much with liquidity, including politicians, that will not solve the problem of money supply. And again, also, looking at the rate at which the inflation is going globally, I have an issue here. The issue is simple. The productive capacity of our economy is not well checked, and it is not also well reported. We have been taking report consistently from the Bureau of Statistics on inflation. And I always salute them, because their role is to guide policymakers of the direction of the economy. Real inflation, core inflation, food inflation, flood inflation. These are things that are advent in modern economies. But however, fundamentally, the economy is in cost of living crisis. You are in cost of living crisis when an average household, his income cannot compete with various demands of that household. That is the first crisis. And so far as that is not addressed, and we keep on thinking that adjusted rate will solve the problem, we cannot have them. Two, there is also an issue which I think if we take it, it will help this economy. For instance, now, recently, our infrastructure decay has caused flood inflation to change prices within the same nation at intervals, Lokoja, just to bring petrol products to the economy. It has changed. And we have seen also the indicators why prices change is as a result of transport cost. So something must be done to that particular aspect. Some time back, myself and Professor, he argued that if I said a product, petroleum product, changes price at the hinterland, then food prices also changes in the south and eastern part because there was so much of wastages. So the Bureau of Statistics is not even taking care of the wastages in our supply bottlenecks. These wastages include, at the bandit angle, local markets that's supposed to feed major market in cities are blocked by terrorists. And a lot of food is being wasted because there is no proper storage facilities. And since there are no storage facilities in the bandit camp, then definitely a lot of wastages are going on. The same thing applies to different perishable items that are supposed to be in the market. That is why recently you cannot understand whether it is a harvesting period or whether it is a farming period, because the prices keep on moving upward, especially the core foodstuffs that are being used in Nigerian household, rice and beans. This is my submission.
Those days, because the essential commodities. Remember in the 80s, when we had the food crisis. Okay, let's bring back Dr. Muda Yusuf. As a matter of fact, your initial contribution actually opened up this conversation, opening several perspectives to that. But I want to ask you on a particular perspective, which was, raised by the last speaker, which has to do with the weak approach by the central bank. We've always heard about monetary policies, fiscal policies, and what have you. And of course, there are interventions, by the central bank, all the while when we were hit, the economy was hit, between, in fact, 2 years ago, a year ago, and stuff like that, when we had, some crisis economically. Now, what was not done right in terms of decisions by the Apex Bank with respect to directing the economy?
Well, in a number of issues, the central bank has opted to adopt what is called unorthodox monetary policy. That is abandoning what we regard as the orthodoxy of economic management from a monetary policy perspective. That is playing out in a number of areas, particularly in the foreign exchange space. The exchange rate, from what I said earlier, is a major factor fueling inflation in this economy. This is not to say that we are that much heavily import dependent, but the reality is that no country exists entirely in isolation of other economies. Even for those in agriculture, they need to import tractors, they need agrochemicals and things like that. So even for the things we produce locally, we need various components of inflation. But the way the central bank has been managing the foreign exchange market is contributing enormously to this problem. Never have we had it in the history of this country, and even in many other economies, where you have the kind of premium between the official window and the parallel market window as we are having it today. In the open market, we are talking about almost 740 now. In the official window, we are talking about maybe 430. You can see the difference. So you have an economy where very few people are getting the foreign exchange as 430, where majority are getting it as 740 or 730. So that is creating a major problem, because the operating exchange rate today that defines the market prices is the parallel market rate. Because the key players in the economy are not having access in the official window. Majority of them are not having access. And those who have access have very minimal access. So they have to fall back on the parallel market. And because the exchange rate system is the way it is not allowing the kind of inflows of foreign exchange. The supply side of the foreign exchange market has been severely affected. And therefore, the situation keeps getting worse by the day. Of course, we have other factors like oil theft and things like that. But the framework for the management of the foreign exchange market itself is flawed and is one of the biggest challenges that we face as far as inflation is concerned. So we need a reform, although the CBN has repeatedly said that it wasn't going to shift ground for whatever reason. But the reality is that that remains one of the biggest problems that we have. The second issue around the response of the monetary authorities is the fact that when we apply monetary policy tools to deal with this issue of inflation, we only go to penalize or put unnecessary pressure on players in the economy that are already indebted to the banks. Because the inflation that we are dealing with are not exactly monetary, they are not driven exactly by monetary factors, except, of course, the component of liquidity injection that is coming directly from the CBN itself. It's not coming from the credits that the banks are given to the economy. You know, private sector credit as a percentage of GDP in Nigeria is one of the lowest that we have in the world. It's less than 15%, just about 12%. In many other economies, it's around 50%. In South Africa, it's over 100%. In the advanced economies, it's over 200%. That underscores the linkage between the banking system and the credit to the economy. But in this economy, it is not like that. So when we continue to, put pressure, apply monetary tools like increasing NTR, like increasing the CRR. CRR today is over 30%, about 32.5%. That means for every 100 naira deposit that the bank gets, 30 or 32 naira of it is being sterilized under the CRR. So how do you want the banks themselves to even operate to support the economy? And on top of that, that is not even solving the problem. We have seen this consistent tightening of monetary policy over the last 3 meetings of the MPC. Inflation has not abated. So this is something that we need to review. If anything, it is all these business people that are struggling to create wealth in the economy that the CBN is piling additional pressure on. If you talk to many of them, at the moment we had a hike in NPR, practically all the people who are indebted to the banks got notices reviewing their interest rate in terms of the credit that they have. I know what it is when
Dr. Muda Yusuf,
are indebted to the bank.
Dr. Muda Yusuf, I want to pause you and ask a follow-up question. There are many aspects to the explanation that you have proffered in terms of the issues around the tools being deployed by the monetary policy authorities to deal with inflationary pressure. And that aspect has to do with Forex. And we've had a conversation around Forex. Sometimes I wonder who has access to Forex these days. Those who are in the real sector complain that they don't have access to Forex. Airlines complain that they don't have access to Forex. I'm talking about domestic airlines. They say they don't have access to Forex to enable them undertake C and D checks to get spares for the maintenance of their aircraft. Foreign airlines, they're complaining about the repatriation. Those who want to pay school fees for their children who are schooling outside the country say they go to their banks and the banks are telling them, no, we don't have access to Forex. So sometimes you just ask yourself, who is having access to this Forex? Are we yielding altogether to the so-called parallel market?
Well, I think the CBN is in a better position to answer that question. And this is the crisis you create when you obstruct the market. I'm not saying that we should go to the extreme of being a market economy, but we should, the CBN has been obstructing the market. And when you obstruct the market, you create a situation where you begin to ration things. And once you adopt a rationing model, especially in these environments, you create a whole lot of transparency problems. Issues of influence, issues of corruption, all sorts of things will come into the picture, such that the main players in the economy will not have access to this forex. Because we have created such a huge incentive for people whose business it is to be round-tripping the currency. I mean, if you move 1 million from the official window to the parallel market window, you are making close to 300 million naira for doing practically nothing, beyond the fact that you just have the connection to get the foreign exchange. That is the biggest source of the distortion that we are having. That is why all the major players are not having access to the forex, because there are all sorts of issues now around the ecosystem of the foreign exchange and a whole lot of corruption around it. And once you create that scenario, this is the kind of outcomes you get. You know, foreign investors who want to repatriate their dividend, they can't do it. Just as you said, the airlines cannot get the forex. All the people that, so you wonder who exactly is getting it. So the point I'm making is that the present model, the present strategy of the CBN in managing it is creating a whole lot of problems. But unfortunately, the CBN has remained adamant about it. So we may have to live with this, at least for the life of this administration. But it's a major problem. And to make it worse, is the fact that if you have a crisis if you have a scarcity, one of the things you need to do to reduce the scarcity is to encourage more supply. Now, this very policy is saying that if you are bringing forex into this economy, you have to bring it in at 435. Whether you are a foreign investor, whether you're a portfolio investor, whether you're an exporter, how will the foreign exchange come into the economy? So that is also blocking the supply of foreign exchange into the economy and worsening the scarcity that we have. So these are the numerous problems that these things are creating. So back to your question, maybe the CBN will be have to publish the list of the people who are getting the foreign exchange at the officiary, so that at least the public can know that.
Okay, Dr. Muda Yusuf. As a matter of fact, I just like the energy you're putting in this, because there is a very careful study and analysis of what the situation really is at the moment. And from all indications, you have all agreed that there are obstructions, you know, as a result of the CBN's action and inaction with respect to dealing with the astronomical rise in inflation in Nigeria. Dr. Okengu, let's bring you in once more. You may like to make comments, you know, on what the other speakers did comment on based on these CBN's actions and inactions. But I was also going to add this to that. Nigeria is not a producing nation. And I mean, Kingsley and I, sometimes we, you know, argue on the issue of when I talk about manufacturing or science and technology and what have you, homegrown technology and all of that. But has there been a nation, you know, that has hit the headline in terms of a good economy, or what we call developed nations? Has there been any of them that got stabilized economically without producing and without engaging in homegrown technology? Is it part of the issues that we have, but already we have not started when it comes to that aspect?
Thank you. Let me begin with what all of us know, what we were taught even in primary school. The first thing they say, factors of production. They say land. They say nearness to market. They say all sorts of
raw material.
But nobody ever says to you at that point in time the dependence of science, technology, and innovation. Nobody was ever taught that. That was a trade secret. Okay, and this was what they were now promoting, was what they call the BS. What was the BS? The British standard. Okay, the German standards, the American standards. Nobody ever said to you that you could not get competitive, okay, without understanding the role of science, technology, and innovation. Now, why did I put the word innovation? Because they teach you science. They probably have a little bit of an understanding of technology, but never take it to putting that I, which is the critical dot. And this is also where I want to bring in the CBN. If you look at the role of the CBN, what they're doing is interventionist. It's not their main function. Okay, it was because of the collapse of the system that the CBN now decided on their own to now intervene. And that intervention is what everybody is reviewing, overviewing, and it's become an elephant, being reviewed by three blind men. Some analysts will say to you, the CBN, without the CBN intervention, the country would have collapsed totally and completely. But the management of that intervention now becomes something that probably we are not very prepared for. Okay? Because if you look at the rail sector support funds that the CBN brought up, very few people could. I don't know if anybody's been able to draw down on that money, because they're built in such a way that it had to benefit the private sector, it had to develop rural infrastructure, and it had to be private sector driven. Now, what that required, okay, was a program or programs that you think through. But because of the disjointed nature of our economic programming and planning, again, now this is where your policy also comes to play. And I can just give you a very little one that we can discuss here, agriculture. Okay, everybody says, oh, must be food sufficient. But nobody has ever interrogated the national policy on agriculture. Okay, and then the policies of the states on agriculture, who actually own the land. Something that simple. You begin to see the gaps. In the past 6-7 years, the CBN from their last announcement now is saying that they want to recover 6.7 trillion that they had, given to people as intervention funds. And anytime I want to talk about funding, I say to you, the moment you mention loan, and you don't mention patient capital or green funding, I say to you, wait for it. You will crash. In today Nigeria, I want you to mention one bank that would ever support a green project. Okay, so in blaming the CBN, I think it becomes a catch-22 situation. If they didn't do it, what would have happened? So, and in now talking about these parallel lines, I think we should just make it as elementary to show or tell people that what we're talking about here is subsidy. What CBN is doing is subsidizing the naira to keep it at that value of 435. And then removing the subsidy to give you the real value, which is what you get at the parallel market. That's what it is. Okay.
But in that case, it's not a generalized subsidy. Subsidy to whom?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It is also the same subsidy that we suffered in the petroleum subsector. To who? Your little car at the most in a year would not take about 100,000 as your fuel, even with the subsidy. But there is a man who is in government, lives in government house, uses government paraphernalia, has about 20 government vehicles, they fuel the car every day. Okay? The same man who is enjoying that subsidy, enjoying fuel diesel, enjoying fuel food, now is taking about 10, 20 million to be able to fuel on the vehicles. So what we have here is not even to begin to look at the issues. I think what we should be looking at is, okay, we are in some kind of mess. And let me come back to your question now directly, Kingsley. Offline, we are discussing where we grew up. And I want me and you to now go back to Proda, and anybody who can know Proda. At one time, I and Kingsley, went to the research center, again in this studio, and we're talking about the Palm Research Center in Benin. If you knew Proda in the heydays of Proda, the only thing Proda couldn't produce was a human being. Proda is still there today.
Half dead.
Well, I wouldn't know. The new man there seems to be very determined to be able to change things around because he has now understood the import of just not science and technology, but the inclusion of innovation. Because that is where research begins to meet business, commercialization, utilization. Okay, and until we get to that point where we stop throwing money at problems, and then we begin to say, okay, and this to let me thank the Ministry of Science and Tech. To that extent, they have identified 6 of these centers. Okay, and in one of the sessions, and I was privileged to be there, somebody got up and said, okay, we've listened to everything you want to do. Beautiful. Where is the funding going to come from? Now, you'll be shocked that for a program that novel, okay, you won't be able to get that funding. Why won't you be able to get it? Because every fund is tied to the loan structure of banks. Every fund you have in Nigeria for development purposes, all right, is tied. And for you to be able to qualify for that loan, the first thing you need to do is to meet the CBA requirements of those banks. The CBN will tell you, okay, I will take a 85% of the risk. Technically, you know, the banks take all the whole risk because they recover the money directly from the banks and then begin to now ask the banks to come and get it back from you. I want to paint this picture so that we get elementary in trying to identify what the issues are. I think what it is we have is that we have this car that somebody has designed, modes have been produced, but somehow, okay, we can't seem to put it together. So everything is in a room, but you can't put it together. The day we're able to sit down on a round table and begin to now say, first and foremost, what is the primary challenge with developing the Nigerian economy? And we use the word DATA, data. Okay, data we need to do with your human resources data, with your natural resources data, with your infrastructure data, with whatever it is you need to do, because each time people talk about infrastructure, I say infrastructure can become a very heavy burden when you start and you're not able to finish. Because that inability for you not to finish, okay, can actually cost you more than you started. I can give you a typical example with the rail tracks. If you start a rail track today and you don't finish that rail track and you leave that site for 3 months, every track you put on that ground will come into the market as pots and plates and pans. They become raw materials to another industry.
Illegal industry.
Well, it is not illegal. No, it is not.
Illegal sourcing of raw materials.
Well, you see, whatever it is you call it. Okay, Kingsley, you see, what I'm trying to say here is that the major problem we have in Nigeria is that we've not developed a think-through attitude. Okay, to be able to say, before you embark on this project, okay, have you thought it through? Now, some people will try to, put in what they call the EIA, put in what they call, feasibilities, put in what they call bankable feasibilities, put in what they even call post-bankable feasibilities, to be able to make certain that by the time you start that project, and this is why in our backyard, South Africa here, they're able to start surfacing their airstrips, maybe 4 or 5 kilometers, and overnight, planes are landing there. Ditto for China. Ditto for most other countries. And then look at us, like I keep saying, celebrating a bridge that we've been building for 16 years. Okay? Now, it is all part of that think-through thing I'm talking about.
Look, we'll pause it. Let me clarify something on Proda you raised.
Yes.
You recalled Proda in its heydays. I was there recently.
Yes.
All right. What is happening there is that they have some equipment, some 40 years old equipment. When we talk about innovation, if not for innovation, Proda would have collapsed entirely. These men there are working with such equipment. The point is poor funding. They couldn't replace this equipment, and the equipment we're talking about is equipment designed for mass production. There are into many things that they can produce. And likewise, other agencies under the Federal Ministry of Science and Technology, which I have visited, the NTA, for instance, has over 10 different research institutes, and these institutes are sophisticated in terms of knowledgeability, in terms of some, facilities that I have there. But the point is, it is poorly utilized.
Naseni is, please, sorry, I'm cutting again. Naseni is producing scientific equipment now that can be used in schools. Naseni. Now,
in two agencies, so they have other things.
So if we are now not looking at Naseni as an agency of government, and the only way you look at it as not as an agency, is just to put innovation. This is where Chris comes in. This is where Kingsley comes in as the communications director of that conglomerate. In Ukraine, I happen to have something to do with their military industrial complex. They have 20 companies under one umbrella. So anywhere they are going to, those 20 companies now have one managing director for all their foreign, partnerships. Why can't we have Proda, okay, as Proda Engineering Company Limited, Nigeria? Government's interest in Proda is land, is capital, is the equipment. Kingsley, who is central bank's interest, is to do the funding. Kidian, who is the manufacturer, is bringing. Okay, Yasu, who is the supplier, is taking. Emeka, who is a farmer, is bringing. And then you put in subsidy. This is why I keep saying to people, until you understand that subsidy becomes price differential if you do not put it in production. And what has killed us is that when you subsidize something, you give it a value it really does not have if it does not come from that production process of now taxes, of now, tax holidays and all that. So in one simple word, Nigeria's problem, probably, when you go to sit down with the CBN, you might also feel some sense of pity because it is against, if I didn't do this, what would I have done better?
Dr. Emeka Okengo, thank you very much for your explanation. Yusha Leo, I want to return to the label you gave. You said that part of what we are dealing with is a cost of living crisis, cost of living. Every time prices go up in Nigeria and you're speaking with a trader or otherwise, everybody talks about the value of the naira. So the dollar has gone up and so on and so forth. Here is one thing that I have difficulty understanding. I earlier asked Dr. Muda, who is getting access to Forex through the I&E window? Well, he says the CBN will be the better position to explain that. That will be the business of the CBN. But we also brag about the value or the quantum of the diaspora remittances into our economy. And sometimes when you look at the numbers of the diaspora remittances into the economy, those numbers almost trump the numbers we have in our foreign reserves. So where do the diaspora remittances go into? What happens? How come all of a sudden, despite all the diaspora remittances running into tens of billions of dollars annually, we are still having this pressure on our naira?
Actually, it has to do with the window at which you are looking at it. But absolutely, the size of the Nigerian economy is a 43 trillion naira economy. And once you have a 43 trillion naira economy, looking at the money supply angle and looking at what the remittance can do to that economy. For instance, let me peg it. You have ultimately $504 billion economy. That $504 billion, all the remittance is not up to $10 billion. And even $10 billion is not coming directly to central bank, because looking at the parallel window, looking at the leakages at the bureau de change, looking at other malpractices that has been in operations for a long period of time, there are better options. Some of these remittances are not coming directly. And look at the dollar account. Look at the promises made. You put your 600,000, for instance, $600,000 into an account and at official rate, while in the parallel market is 740. Definitely, that will create an angle at which there is a lot of options for those in diaspora. However, I would like to dwell on what Professor has rightly pointed out, like looking at the CBN possibly intervention into the economy. It is good aspect at which CBN to intervene, because prior to this, laissez-faire has taken over most of our economies. We could not manage the foreign exchange. There was a time when second-tier exchange market was in operations. It is from the central bank. But now, the Dutch auction also came. But unfortunately now that the CBN decided to be at a more or less flexible scenario, where, for instance, the CBN has its window to help investors, to facilitate investment, but at the end of the day, who are the investors? And it is not for me to answer that, because the CBN has all the requirements to qualify you as an investor, to qualify you for the access to the petrol, to the dollars that are available. But unfortunately, malpractices by operators.
And some persons have also said that politicians have bought up all the dollars, in the land, and it's really hitting. This is just the beginning, because they just started campaign. And I recall vividly, that in those days, they said that Nigeria had defied all economic policies that had ever been used across the globe. Then we got SAP, which eventually did not all go well, for the system. I recall also one former head of state did say, look, that this SAP didn't have a human face and what have you. Nigeria perhaps is passing through all of that all over again. All right, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the NTA network service. We'll take a short break now. When we come back, we'll continue with the conversation.
What we face mostly now are flashes of cowardly attacks from the rump of groups that have been routed in one location or the other, moving to another to give the false impression that they are still strong. Our ultimate goal is to eliminate them altogether and restore total and lasting peace over every inch of the Nigerian soil. Sounding tall, but take it home. We are determined to ensure that every inch of the Nigerian soil is safe. That determination is there. The order has been given. But we shall continue to protect the lives and property of Nigerians and foreigners in our midst. We shall continue to work for the peace of the nation and deter elements that constitute threats to the people. We shall bear the full powers of the government to secure every inch of our land. We shall not rest until peace is fully restored to Nigeria.
This message is brought to you from the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Every day in our country, senior citizens are discriminated against, disparaged, and treated with disdain by those who ought to respect them. We are all complicit in the way we have treated the elderly members of our society as institutions, families, or members of a shared society. Every time senior citizens get offered less than they deserve for the work they do because they are old, poor, and desperate, we are failing them. Senior citizen loses a child, and wow, they must be responsible for their death. Every time a senior citizen gets labeled a witch, is called mad, and shooed out of the way because they have no memory of where they were headed and look unkempt, we are failing them. We say, abeg, it all old, make it do die, make everybody for rest, to ailing parents, uncles and aunts. That's discrimination. That is neglect. When you see an old woman getting beat up and being accused of witchcraft, do not turn the other way. Stop and teach people that white hairs, wrinkles and hunchbacks are no evidence of witchcraft. Aging comes with a memory decline. Sometimes it's not out of place to have elderly people lose their way, forget details of their lives, and how to properly take care of themselves. When they get to this stage, they deserve your empathy, not scorn. Our ailing fathers, mothers, aunties, and uncles are deserving of quality healthcare and peaceful transition. Make their last moments memorable. Senior citizens have paid their dues. They deserve your care. Stop all forms of discrimination against them today.
To every politician, as the campaigns gain momentum and passions begin to rise, remember, the errors of your opponents do not make you a success. Do not run down your opponent and inflame passions to violence between and among your supporters. What counts is what you plan to do for the electorate and how you intend to relieve the sufferings and bring succor. Nigeria is in dire need of patriotic leaders at all levels, leaders who will make national development their priority. Concentrate on telling the electorate what you intend to do when you get into office. Focus on making your vision clear to the electorate. Don't engage in verbal abuses, fake news or speeches. Keep dealing with issues that will bring progress. You win the hearts and minds of the people by being above board, by being civil, patriotic, and showing empathy. Let's join hands to make the 2023 elections peaceful. A message from the National Orientation Agency.
We've been trying our best to contain the situation, and in our operations we've been able to make a lot of recoveries. We've been able to also arrest suspects that are involved in this kind of activities, and we've been able to also recover particularly arms and ammunition from those who are carrying it unlawfully and disturbing the peace of the people. But generally, our morale in the Nigerian police is always guided by our commitment to do what we have sworn to do. Peace and security must be looked into as a priority by all, to look at security as the business of all of us.
This message is from the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on NTA's network service, and we are here in our Abuja headquarters studios. Our three guests are still with us. Here in Abuja, Emeka Okengu, Yusha Waleyu, and via Zoom from Lagos, Muda Yusuf. Muda Yusuf, well, we are the home stretch of today's conversation, and I was just wondering, against the backdrop of the issues that you gentlemen have raised, one thing that pops up is to say, assuming, and indeed that is the case, we are having a number of causative factors in our cost of living crisis, flood, insecurity, banditry. I understand we've lost the Zoom connection to Dr. Muda Yusuf, but the question, of course, will still be relevant to our other guests here at the studios. We're having all of this domestic... well, Muda Yusuf, I understand you're back with us on Zoom now. I was just saying that against the backdrop of the many factors, municipal and international, that have been identified as being contributory to our cost of living crisis, the question then arises, how do we build resilience for the economy so that we can absorb the shocks, whether domestic or foreign, for a while? Not that a crisis breaks out in Ukraine or elsewhere around the world, and then we are already catching cold or even COVID, and everybody, of course, is running helter-skelter. How do we build that resilience? I think it's an important thing, especially, for instance, in our food security matrix.
Well, building resilience, of course, these are issues that we have discussed, over and over again. Nothing new to add. If we're able to deal with the problem of insecurity, we'll be solving a major part of the problem. Because the situation with the food crisis, even the Russia-Ukraine problem, wouldn't have been as profound in its impact as it is if we didn't have the problem with insecurity and the disruption it has created. So tackling insecurity, and I must acknowledge that the government is doing quite a lot, at least in recent times, to deal with the situation. we're able to, make a lot more impact in dealing with the problem of insecurity. That will help to deal with this problem of crisis and strengthen our resilience. Secondly, we are too dependent on petroleum products that are imported. We are spending close to $15 billion annually on importation of petroleum products. That is putting a whole lot of pressure on our reserves. And that is also contributing to the challenges we are having with our forex and our exchange rate, in addition to the policy problem that we have in that space. So it's not excusable that we have been in oil business for almost 60 years. And here we are, the only oil producing country that is importing petroleum products at the scale at which we are importing. So whatever it will take, possibly this administration or the next administration, we need to accelerate our self-reliance in terms of petroleum products, refined petroleum products. In fact, we should be exporting. We should be doing a lot more in our gas sector. Gas is now hot cake all over the world. We have more reserves in gas than in oil. So we need to create the environment. It is not the government that will do it. It is the policy and the incentives and the regulations that you put in place that will incentivize private investment in those areas. So we need to accelerate that. Then, of course, we need to look at our tariff policy. Because as far as food is concerned, we are now entering an emergency phase. It is good to say, okay, we should eat what we grow and all of that. But when you have a situation where flood is ravaging everywhere, let us revisit, if only temporarily, our import policy on food. If you need to open the window slightly so that some food items can come in to bring relief to the poor. Because you can only govern people who are alive. You don't want people to die of starvation. So at this point, we cannot continue to be as rigid as we used to be. So we need to review it in a way that also doesn't cause too much disruption to those who are still growing some food items in the country. Then, of course, we need to look at, again, we have talked about forex. If the CBN can review that will help. Then, of course, issues of productivity and issues of the way that the CBN is also fueling liquidity in the economy. We are not saying that the CBN should not support government or lend money to government, but we should define the limits so that it doesn't become almost something that government is now almost depending on to such a high degree. 20 trillion naira in terms of CBN support to the government in terms of is too high. So that we need to review it so that we don't create too much of an inflationary problem. Because if there's anything that is worsening poverty today, it is inflation. It is leading to a situation now where even labor and all of them, they are not talking about agitation for wages. Because inflation has massively eroded the purchasing power, especially in the public sector. So these are some of the things, of course, long-term issues about ramping up our productivity. Productivity is still very low, which is affecting competitiveness, affecting our output. We need to do a lot in that area, looking at the structural impediments to productivity, looking at how we can unlock more inflow of private capital into building infrastructure, because infrastructure is critical to productivity. And the way things are going, government alone cannot fund the infrastructure. So we should have a framework that will allow a lot more private investment to come into the infrastructure space. So these are some of the things that I think we can do, to build the kind of resilience that we need to build as an economy.
All right, Dr. Muda Yusuf, thank you indeed for your very germane points there on what we could do to effect some level of resilience and ensure that the nation continues to run without deepening into more worse situations. Now, we talked about the importation of food items, and that brings me to the issue of flood that we are currently experiencing in the country. Of course, off the air, we were talking about that no governor has actually come out, to cry out for assistance with respect to the flood ravaging many parts of the country, especially food producing states and even oil producing states such as Bayelsa, Rivers, and the rest of them. So all these are also contributory factors, to the inflation that we are talking about. Because the moment we're not producing enough food to eat, of course, is a great deal of problems. So, gentlemen, let me bring you back. Joshua. Yeah. All right. Now we're talking about resilience now. We're talking about remediation now. What can be done to see whether we can, have a stronger base, in terms of absorbing the shock of the current inflationary rate in Nigeria?
Like you rightly pointed out at the earlier on, cost of living crisis, and any economy that is faced with a cost of living crisis is in serious danger. Danger in the sense that first to help the household, then after rescuing the household, then you rescue the operators, that is the business community. When you rescue the business community, then you now see the response with your GDP. You cannot do that if you don't know the total number of population. That is why population census is very important, and that is why demographic structure, to know the demographic structure is also very important. It is through that you now understand the consumption pattern of the household. Once you don't understand the consumption pattern, whatever policy, you may decide to say, okay, import chicken. Now, who is to buy chicken? Who is a fan of chicken? So the obvious factor in trying to be on a resilient scale is the fact that government must secure the environment first. Because in securing the environment, that is how you attract investors. And that is how you even attract the remittances from those in diaspora. Not only that, there is also need for government at this critical time, looking at the appropriation that is sent to the National Assembly, which has emphasized sustainability, fiscal. But there is a factor there. There is fiscal instability worldwide. And since there is fiscal instability, I think government must look into the tariff regime, especially now that government is looking for IGR. Looking for IGR to finance the deficit in the appropriation does not qualify us to look at to what is happening in the custom and excise, where you triple the tariffs, the bills that you are taking, which also will add to the transport cost generally, not even looking at the production of PMS. And that is the next angle. We are assured that by September, Dangote is going to start producing the PMS, but up to now, it has been shifted. So this kind of things, government must be proactive to make sure that unless we have PMS produced and automobile gas oil produced in Nigeria, we cannot bring temporary shocks, particularly in the transport sector, which is translating to general price increase. However, I think the central bank in its own mandate, they have tried in their intervention. But I am frustrated. The CBN has allocated above 9 trillion, and it is now facing so much of difficulty in retrieving only 3.7 trillion. So if the CBN can now look at the profile and check certain limitation, especially on the percentage of the interest, which is 9%, I think the CBN also has to come and reduce the rate, so that those who are potential people to now pay back can do that in good time, so that the CBN will be in a good position to reallocate same resources back to the economy.
All right, Yusuf, thank you very much. Again, of course, there are a number of issues, gentlemen, you always bring up whenever we have conversations around the economy. So this is an ongoing conversation. But Dr. Emeka Okengo, let's have your take on what more we would need to do in terms of resilience. You already talked about the productive base, science, technology, and innovation. That point is noted. But in the interim, how do we go about this? And let's also focus on the dangers that we have ahead of us. We have seen the floods. When the Adamawa crisis first occurred, those down the river in Makurdi were warned. It hit Makurdi, fatalities. Then Lokoja was coming. Lokoja didn't anticipate the volume of the waters that it got, and in several other local governments, and we saw the disruptions, which are still ongoing. Kirian, a couple of days ago, you recall, we were discussing what might have happened to one of the bridges on that major arterial road. And now Delta, Anambra, Imo, Bayelsa, and of course rivers, they are now taking the hit before the waters get into the Atlantic Ocean. We have seen the damage to farmlands, hundreds of thousands of hectares. A couple of years ago, we also had a similar crisis. This was restricted to somewhere around Kebbi. I recall the governor crying out on that occasion. But we hear about agricultural risk insurance. Is this not the kind of time that we should be hearing from those entities, even though the extent of the damage might not have been computed? What is it that farmers should expect? Are they just going to be on their own? Typical of us, when a crisis breaks, you put your hand on your head, I don't die, or X, Y, Z. What are the options available to us that we can begin to tap into to absorb this shock and then move on to the next season?
The first option, sir, is to know that rain-fed agriculture is not the way to go. Never has been. Because if flooding is not taking your crops, saline nutrition could. If saline nutrition is not, the certification code. So far, thus far, we've lost about 13,000 kilometers of land to desertification. So the idea of farming should be rested vis-a-vis rain-fed. Now, I'll give you some very, very practical examples. For those in the north and those who have ever visited a place they call Tiga Dam. Okay, Tiga Dam was producing a fish they call Giwarua. Did I get it right, Joshua?
Yeah.
That's what they call that fish.
Exactly.
Now, Giwa is supposed to be elephant.
Yeah.
Very,
Giwa,
yes,
Giwa,
very big fishes. As young people, Tiga Dam was a trip, okay, to Neverland, if you may. Beautiful place. And all dams constructed in this country are constructed for 3 or 4 purposes: energy, irrigation, fisheries, recreation. We have
and water consumption.
Yes, we have 320, maybe counting. I want you to imagine a situation, sir, where we committed only 20% of these dams to producing mackerel. That gives us the geisha all of us were using to eat gari, that we're using cold water to make as younger people. Give us the tin, the other one, the tin, what do they call it now? The sardines. Okay, which are again another species of fish. This can be grown yesterday. Now, within that vicinity of those dams, I want us to imagine that you now have greenhouses who are now producing the pepper, the tomato that you're using to put inside, because when you open those fishes and pour them out, what you see are these things that look like stew. Okay, for those of us who witnessed it. And what are we getting it for? I want us to look at our universities. Abuja University is sitting on probably more than 13,000 hectares of land. So what it means is that we can have an internationally, commercially operated livestock program that can do minimum of 1 million to 5 million livestock in Abuja within that university confinement, that can supply all the milk we need to begin to produce yogurts. NAPRI, one little institute in Zaria, is actually producing a lot of, the fish stock for Dano milk, if I get my statistics right. Now, I want us to look at all the little villages we have, my village, your village, my ward, that every ward of Nigeria has one special center of excellence made of mud or figs or trees or whatever it is that people live there. And then we're using them, supporting them with STIs. We will not need import substitution, would always stay, like Muda says from Lagos. But that substitution has to be a very negligible percentage of what you're not able to produce commercially in your country. But I can say to you, we can eliminate import substitution because there is nothing, practically nothing, we cannot grow in Nigeria, including caviar, if you may.
Thank you very much indeed. As a matter of fact, when you were, when you were talking, I was really almost moping and stuff, because in other crimes, even the, excuse me, even the police have farms, the military, all have farms.
Institutions,
institutions have farms, and all of that. So that's just that. Dr. Meko Kengo, thank you indeed for coming this morning on the program. Yusuf Aliyu, it's been wonderful talking to you this morning. And I've got Dr. Muda Yusuf from Lagos. It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you for coming. Now, sports.